I'm from LA, fourth generation Angelino. I grew up in the canyons in Nichols Canyon, and our house, my mom still lives there, but it's kind of like a long, skinny house that kind of angles out like two arms reaching out, and it's all glass on one side facing the pool. So it's kind of like
Wow.
it wants to be a Cliff May. It's not, but it's similar to that, kind of nestled at the bottom of the canyon, looking at the pool and looking at the rest of the hills. But it's in a unique
Whoa.
place because, at least when I was growing up, it wasn't a fancy canyon, but you're kind of in the middle of the city. So we were easily able to go into the valley, into the Hollywood, downtown. Like, it's just kind of,
Yeah.
we were all over the place. We never really, I never really thought of, a lot of people are like, I won't go past the 405. I won't go this way. I don't think like that because I went to school in the Valley in Burbank. My grandparents lived in Culver City. My parents worked in Burbank and then downtown. And we were just everywhere, all over, all the time. So that feels normal to me to just, always be exploring the city.
Was traffic as bad when you were a kid?
I mean, we thought it was bad then, but it just,
Yeah,
keeps getting more.
it's
So
gotten worse. It
yeah,
is. It is kind of relative, though. I mean,
yeah,
you're right. It is funny for folks who don't know about Los Angeles. There are obviously a lot of freeways, and they kind of cut the city up. So it's a sort of an unspoken or spoken understanding of if you live on one side of the 405 and I live on the other, we're just not going to see each other ever.
yeah. And I broke the
Yeah.
I broke the rule right away. Like, you should never say the name of that freeway out loud. It's bad luck.
Oh, is that the case?
Yeah, yeah. You can say San Diego Freeway, but don't say the number. And I blew it.
I have a
So,
similar thing with earthquakes. I don't say the E word. I say spaghetti instead. Because I feel like
But you just broke the
if you say
rule.
the word, well, I had to explain to you, so I didn't know how else to do
Yeah.
it. But
so yeah, it
But
sounds
you're
like you
just
had.
it's you
Yeah,
you
go
you
ahead.
have to take side roads, back roads,
yeah,
always. That's how you avoid the
Yeah.
freeways.
Yeah,
gotcha.
yeah, yeah. This is true for
Yeah,
sure. So okay, so and I think your family has been in Los Angeles for quite a few generations, if I
Hmm.
understand correctly.
That's right. Yeah, my mom grew up in the Valley. My grandfather grew up in Pasadena. His parents in Pasadena too. And they, at least my grandparents were in the film business. But like my grandmother worked at Disney. She was the head of the research department there in the
wow.
50s. My grandfather was a film editor. My dad grew up in Canada, but he came here uh, because he ran a recording studio in Vancouver, and Mike Nichols was filming something there. Met him, and he was like, "You're moving to LA with me." So that's kind of how those things happened. But
Interesting,
yeah,
interesting. So fairly creative family. So
but no, but then he came here, did that for a little while, and then left that. Started a two-way radio company. So he's an engineer. My mom was a painter, so no more film in our family, but creative.
but creative, yeah, for sure, for sure. So then, what led you to architecture? Did you play with Legos as a
Of
kid? Did
course.
you have an of course? Did you have an uncle who was an architect? How did that come into play?
No, I didn't know any architects. Was always interested in buildings, and anytime there was a house being built or anything like that in the neighborhood, I would sneak into the construction site to see what was happening. Um, yeah, I just always found that interesting. And then in the 90s, my dad was looking for a new office space, and so we were driving all around downtown areas to look for a building. So, I mean, that in itself was interesting to me. And then he found this art colony in Lincoln Heights called the Brewery, which is
Hmm.
the old Pabst Blue Ribbon Brewery that had been turned into artist lofts in the 80s. So, like, one of the first adaptive reuse projects. And that's where I started to see like that kind of thing is possible. And it just was really interesting to me because I hate to see things get torn down. So, I always am thinking, how can we reuse something in a cool new way? So I think that's where that started.
Interesting, interesting. And so well, I'm assuming you're in high school, and then you have to decide your future by choosing a major. That's how it works in the United States and other countries, I suppose. And so just your pure fascination with buildings led you to architecture, or are you considering other things like film, for instance?
We actually I went to this little Catholic school in Burbank, and they had a little film program that I
Mm-hmm.
was in. So I kind of thought that I might do that, but
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Architecture was just seemed more interesting and unique to me, also because I didn't know anybody that was doing that. And then, when I started thinking about like, that's maybe what I want to do, my mom started introducing me to any architect she knew. So we were driving around town, like, meet this architect and this architect, and every single one of them said, don't do it.
Yeah.
You're not going to make money. It's too hard. Don't do it. And gave me all the reasons why you need to be super passionate about it. My college counselor, who was like an 85-year-old nun, also told me not to do it. I think all that pushed me to do it.
That's great.
I feel like architects should rethink about what they say to young kids. They should say, yeah, sure, you should go do it. And maybe they won't.
But I think that's the punchline that we were expecting. Because I mean, this is a while ago now, but were the architects serious, or were they saying it kind of jokingly and saying, you should do what you want to do?
It felt serious to me. I don't know.
Yeah.
I was, 16. So I have a friend that just started teaching at Cal Poly, and she was talking about this exact thing, because she was like, I want to inspire them, but I also want them to understand.
Yeah.
So I told her this story, and I was like, there has to be a better way to communicate the same information without saying it like that.
Yeah.
I don't know that we have a solution, but...
Yeah, exactly. It's tough. I mean, on occasion, not to go too far on a tangent, but, folks reach out to us through the show, and sometimes we get contacted by folks who are like high schoolers, which is a very weird thought that there's a 14-year-old listening to the show. But they reach out and they ask, I'm very interested in architecture, and they're a kid, right? And they want to pursue it, and they're asking for advice, and that's one situation. Other times we have people who are older, or, probably already should be in college at that kind of age, and they're thinking of doing community college or thinking of going to college. They want to know about architecture as a career. And in those cases, I'm a bit more nervous because I don't know their situation. If you're 24, you could have a kid, you could have, quote, real responsibilities. And at that point, that's usually when I say, okay, these are all the great things, but also be mindful. It's not, sometimes people think that architects are
It's not like what you see in the movies.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Or like we're attorneys, or someone said to me recently, like, oh, you must fly first class everywhere because you're an architect. I'm like, what? I'm like, you know how expensive first class is? Like, you crazy? So I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I often think if they taught us in school what we actually do, would we have stayed? But also, it would have been helpful. There's so much that they don't teach us, just about how to run a business. But then at the same time, it's like, it's such a great and broad education, teaching you how to think in a different way. I think it's a great education, and you could go do anything after that.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I don't know about you, but we've had so many friends who studied architecture, practiced for a little bit, and then they pivot to something else, and they're doing extremely well in whatever job they land in.
Yeah,
absolutely. And I mean, don't you think about that same move yourself every day?
Well, now that you mention it.
There are easier paths for sure. So high school, and then I didn't know this, but you went to Cal Poly SLO.
Yes.
Did you? I did as well, but I had no idea you did. Did you consider other schools? Did you consider going out of state? It was Cal Poly SLO kind of the obvious choice.
Yeah, I didn't really consider going out of state. That was mainly because, I mean, my parents both had their own businesses, so we never moved, but I went to 7 different schools, and that was like, we could afford that private school. Oh, we can't afford that anymore. And just, hopping back and forth. So it needed to be an affordable choice.
Yeah.
I mean, that was honestly my top choice. And I applied to a few other places. I didn't hear back from San Luis, but somehow I got accepted to Pomona, which I didn't apply to.
Mhm.
Anyway, I just kind of waited and it happened. So I lucked out, and it was a great place to go, especially coming from a big city to
Mm-hmm.
all of a
Mhm.
sudden be put into like a real small town. I mean, it's 30,000 people. It's not that small, but for me it was.
Yeah.
And I mean, they sent me to Italy for my fourth year. Like, it was great.
That's interesting, actually. Yeah, you kind of like did the reverse. I feel like a lot of maybe like I did the opposite, right? In France, I'm from a small town, and I went to
Hmm.
Paris to school, and like
Hmm.
you kind of
Hmm.
did the opposite. You went from the big city to the small town, which I think
Uh,
in whichever order, like they're interesting thing to experience because they really put you in like two different contexts and make you understand, the urban fabric in a very different way.
Yes, exactly, exactly. It was interesting, and you, it's also easier to really tackle on your own to explore everything, literally everything.
Hmm.
Um, it's stifling in other ways because it's a small town, but um, it
mhm.
it it also made us focus on work because there wasn't a lot of distraction.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So, our year worked really hard.
Yeah. Yeah. I could see that. I could definitely see that. I experienced some of that too. It's a good place to either work or just hang out with all your friends downtown.
Hmm. Hmm.
That
Yeah,
is the
I
one thing
think
I do kind of miss.
they called us the
Yeah.
party year but we were like, yes, we party, but we work hard too. We do both.
That sounds like an architect major right there to me.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, work hard, party hard.
Yeah.
What was Italy like? Had you been abroad at that point in time before? Had you been to Italy before?
No, I'd never been to Europe. So I think a lot of people that went with us, they taught like the kids that went the year before taught like a class to the outgoing kids to prepare us to teach us like how
Hmm.
to wear a money belt and all these things. And it
Yeah.
was so weird. Um,
Survival skills.
yeah, but it was just like common sense thing. It was strange. I thought it was strange, but we got there and a lot of kids were shocked, and some people went home, and it was just, I got there and I was
Really?
like, oh, this is right, this feels right.
Wow.
Like, I don't know, I just felt at home right away. And
Did you ever think about that you would live there? I
before,
mean,
oh,
after the exchange program.
well, I did a little bit. um I had gone to Venice to the Biennale,
Hmm.
and on the way back to the train station I was on the Vaporetto, and I overheard some kid behind me asking his mom, what is that building? And she said, oh, it's the Guggenheim. I didn't know that there was a Guggenheim there. So I literally got off at the next station, went to the Guggenheim, saw all these kids my age working there, and I was like, how did you get this job? Um, and it turns out it was an internship program for art history students.
Hmm.
So,
Oh.
I had that in the back of my mind when I came back after my fourth year and, was doing fifth year. Everyone was getting, like, KTGY was hiring people when we still had 6 months of school. It was, that also seemed strange to me. Like, I wasn't ready for that kind of job.
Hmm.
Um, so I applied to that internship, and I was like, well, let's just see. Maybe I can get a 3 month break and go back there. And they hired me, and after 3 months, they ended up hiring me to run the internship program. So I was there for almost 2 years. It was great.
Oh,
Oh,
wow. Okay,
wow.
cool.
Well,
And
good
then
thing you hop on that Vaporetto.
Yeah.
that's right. It's just like I just happened to be in the right spot to overhear this lady. I mean, I don't know how
Yeah.
that happened, but then I tried to get a job as an architect there, and I couldn't get a paid position
Yeah.
because you work for free, which is fine because if you live with your mom, which is common.
Right.
But
Yep.
my mom was here. I didn't have the money to do that, so I had to come home.
You could have lived with someone else's mom. That's probably a thing.
Yeah, yeah.
That's fascinating. So, what did you do at the Guggenheim? I mean, I know you said that you were a director or coordinator at some point, but like, it's a museum, so.
It's a small museum, but the interns really like, they spend half their time guarding the museum,
Hmm.
and then the other half the time they spend with the staff. So they'll spend a day working with the membership office, or doing translations, or working on press releases, or just working with a curator. They'll also like spend a day at the ticket desk. So they do every part of museum operations. So then when I was running that, I was overseeing all those people. So I would have 30 interns at a time, 30 staff people, and I was the person in the middle, like coordinating it all.
Wow.
And like with the skeleton key to open the safe to lock the money away and open the front gate. I was like, why did you put a 24-year-old in charge of this? But
24-year-old American, yeah.
Yeah. And my Italian was fair when I started, but that first month that I was in charge, like the Italians just would yell at me in Italian. And it was always like, where the hell is this intern? Like, this intern's fucked up. There's not enough money in the register at the end of the day. And it was super stressful. And then afterwards they'd be like, hey, you want to get a coffee? Like, no, I don't want to get a coffee with you. You've just been like terrible to me all day. And so, my Italian got really much better really fast. And as soon as I was able to yell back at them, it stopped. They just stopped, and I all of a sudden I got their respect, and it totally changed the whole situation. So
are you only fluent in angry Italian? Or?
Yes. Yes. And then the security guards saw that this was happening, so they'd come down at the end of the day to teach me dirty Venetian things to say in dialect. That really worked.
Yeah. Really that's what we want to know for sure. I'm kind of curious. So what was the reason for interning there and then becoming coordinator? Was it just because you wanted to be in Italy? Was that the primary reason, and this was just a means to that? Or it sounds like, with the work you do, you have some interest in history and existing or old things. So was that part of it as well?
Yeah, I think both of those things. And also, my mother's an artist, so I grew up inside LACMA, and in her studio and galleries. And so that has always been a part of my life, being, part of, adjacent to art. So it was interesting to me. It also an excuse to not work at KTGY. Sorry, KTGY, nothing against you. I just wasn't ready for that at that time.
Hey, but KTGY, for folks who don't know, is actually, I don't know, it's an architecture office, but they're a larger size office.
Yeah, they're at least countrywide. I don't know if they have offices outside of the U.S., but all across the U.S. they have offices. And there are people from that class of mine that got hired before we graduated that are still working there, and they're doing great. Yeah. It just it wasn't the right path for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The other thing I was wondering is, you had mentioned visiting that Pabst building that got that was an adaptive reuse project. It sounds like, basically, right? It was being used for something else, and that kind of struck a chord with you. Did that interest in that type of work, was it very clear in your mind when you were in school at Cal Poly? For some students that classmates I had, I remember they had a very clear, maybe direction, but also just set of interests. They just wanted to do single family houses, or they only wanted to do X thing. And that always fascinated me.
Yeah, it kind of was. Another thing that happened when I was in high school, around that same time that we moved to the brewery, there was this Huell Hauser episode.
Okay, you have to explain to people who that is for people who don't know.
So he was from Texas, I think.
Something like that.
And he I don't know when he moved to LA, in the 80s or something like that. And he had this show on local television and on PBS called California's Gold. And he had a local LA one too. I forget what it's called. But in California's Gold, he would go to all these, amazing old sites around California and interview the people that were working there. And it would be like he would go to the Santa Barbara Mission and talk to the historians and the janitor and like whatever random passersby, and he was so excited about everything. Whatever somebody told him, he would say, "That's amazing."
Yeah, yeah.
Can you believe that?
Yeah.
So there was an episode where he went to Long Beach, to the old naval yard that was designed by Paul Williams, and they were about to tear it down. So he was talking to historians and people at the naval yard, and just the same kind of thing. And he was trying to figure out how to stop it from happening. So then he had, like, I don't remember exactly how it happened, but he just like turned to the camera and he was like, next Saturday or whenever it was, he tried to get everybody to come, like a whole bunch of people to come down to the naval yard to tour it and show, I guess, the Navy that it was an important resource that we shouldn't tear down and we could find another use for it. So I got my mom to drive me down there. We went to that and got to tour it, and they did tear it down in the end. So I think that's when I started thinking, like, we could have made something cool out of that. And they tore it down, and it's just container yard now.
Yeah, pretty senseless.
Yeah. Sad.
That's the Huell Hauser reference is fantastic. I mean, anyone who's from California is gonna know, from our generation or older, will know who that is.
I'm gonna have to watch that.
Oh, it's great.
Absolutely.
He has this pretty thick Southern accent. And as a kid, it didn't ever really occur to me that he's not a Californian. I don't know why it didn't occur to me, but just a soft, very nice to the ears kind of accent. I kind of miss that because, you have someone who's not from California. He's from what would typically be like a red state. And he would just tour. And like you said, he was always super thrilled to talk to whoever it was.
It just got you
thrilled
excited
about the thing.
Yeah.
I know. And it was just like positivity, which seems to be hard to come by these days. Yeah. So that was a great show for sure.
I mean, I think when you look at that, like, I was putting the pieces together without really realizing it, right?
Yeah.
And I did meet him a couple times, and I never told him that. I wish I had told him that.
You met Huell Hauser?
Yeah.
What?
I met him twice. I got to give him a tour of a building that I worked on, an adaptive reuse project downtown.
Wow.
And when he shakes your hand, it's like your arm is going like this. But he was so nice, and he thought what I did was amazing. But I wish I had told him that. I mean, it would have been nice to tell him, but that's okay.
Yeah. I'm gonna guess he's not around anymore.
No, he passed away a few years ago. Gotcha.
That was a really good. Well, you could pick up where he left off and start your own show. And,
maybe.
That's actually really remarkable. Just this dumb question. Did you get his signature? His autograph?
No, I did not.
I would have asked for his autograph.
I know.
Did you get a selfie with him?
No, but I grew up in Hollywood, and you're trained to like, don't talk to people. Like, let them live their life. My first job, I worked at a wine shop on Sunset Boulevard, and I did delivery. So, I would be delivering to some random person and then a celebrity's house. And then, you just had to act like it was normal. So
right.
It's ingrained in me.
So you finished Cal Poly in 2003, I think. And then you end up, what happens right afterward? Or you worked for a few years, obviously, in Italy. We talked about that. And then when you come back, you end up working at Omgivning, which is where you're at currently, or no?
Yes, but actually, going back to your question about, did I know that that's what I wanted to do? In school, I was interested in that. Then living in Florence, like, I saw how Europeans treat old buildings differently than we do. We tear things down all the time.
Sorry, I spoke over you. In what sense do they treat them differently?
Well, we tear things down all the time, and they don't do that. But they also don't necessarily like preserve it like exactly the year that it was built, like a house museum. They find new uses and do cool additions, and are able to do something great out of something old that isn't just 100% preservation, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I thought that was interesting, that kind of mix between old and new. So then when I came back for my 5th year thesis, I did a project like that downtown. And because I was doing it in downtown LA, I was doing research. I started reading the downtown news, driving up and down between San Luis and LA. And I found an article about these architects that were doing adaptive reuse in LA, Kilifer Flameng. So I started following them. There wasn't social media, so I just was following like articles and things. So then when I came back from Venice and was ready to look for a job, my mom had they have like an open studio event at the brewery. So which was called the Brewery Art Walk. So at Brewery Art Walk, I was there helping her, and Wade Kilifer and Barbara Flameng just happened to come by. And then it turned out that Barbara went to high school with my mom. So, I got introduced to them, and Wade just said, call us. So I did. So then I worked that's the only place I interviewed, because I had been wanting to work there. So I worked there for 7 years. That's where I met Karin, who started Omgivning, because she was there for 10 years or 15. I don't remember exactly.
Gotcha.
And that was
interesting.
That time, was when downtown was really booming. A lot of adaptive reuse projects were happening and opening, and every week there was a new restaurant or bar or something interesting opening. So I almost had like an informal competition with Karin. We'd see each other on Monday and it'd be like, did you go to that new bar opening? Oh yeah, I went last week. Just there was so much excitement about it, and downtown Art Walk was happening. It was an exciting time downtown. So then when 2008 happened and a lot of that work slowed down, people were getting furloughed. That's when I started talking to her about how could we create a new office that was only focused on downtown, focused on, finding new uses for old buildings, because there was so much unused building stock. How could we focus on that and create a place that, is like some type of umbrella that we could work with other people on an as needed basis and just collaborate. So then she started Omgivning, and I was furloughed, so I was only working part-time. So then I was working part-time for her, in her kitchen.
Nice.
Her son was doing his coloring homework next to me, and she was on the other side. That's how Omgivning started.
Wow. That's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
So he was doing the coloring homework. You were also doing coloring homework, but just on a slightly different scale. Can I borrow your red crayon, please? That's really, really fascinating. I get my dates mixed up here. So I
overlapped. I worked for both for a while.
I see. Gotcha. I gotcha. Yeah, because I do remember now that your office started in 2009, which is right after 2008, which is a brutal time.
That's exactly why it started.
Yeah. I want to ask, you talked about the reasons why you both had these conversations of starting an office and having this mission, which comes from an architect's perspective and their observations of downtown and the potential for these buildings and all the stuff you said, which is very fascinating, because fundamentally it's sort of like the opposite of how a lot of architects operate, in the sense that you saw something that was necessary, so you sought to create an office to help do that, as opposed to the other way around, which is being reactive, which is saying, what do clients need? What does the market want? What are people asking me to do? And then I'll do that in response. So I guess the question is, was adaptive reuse desirable by people who owned buildings? Was it a thing that people knew about at that point in 2009? Was this a phrase that existed?
Oh,
because now it's known, but
no, it definitely was. It wasn't as talked about, but the city created the adaptive reuse ordinance in like 99, I think. So a lot of those first projects were happening in 2000, but they take a long time. So
Yeah.
In 2006, 7, 8, like a lot of adaptive reuse projects opened downtown. So there was a lot of, just buzz and excitement about that. So it definitely was known at that time. But when we started, we weren't just immediately doing, full conversions of high-rise buildings.
Sure.
Like our first project was a barbershop, and that was in a building that I worked on at KFA. I knew the owners. They had a tenant. They introduced me to the tenant, so I brought that project in. KFA didn't want the project. They were like, "It's too small. We can't do it."
Yeah.
So then I brought it to Karin. So we were doing little things like that, and we got introduced, or she knew already. I don't know how that happened, but introduced to the Delajani family that owns 4 historic theaters on Broadway and a bunch of other buildings, and they held these orders to comply about unpermitted work and roll down grills that you're not allowed to have on Broadway. So we were like fixing things like that. So it wasn't glamorous necessarily, but it got us introduced to other people. And we really never had to do any marketing back then. It was just all word of mouth, and we just kept growing. Like when there was too much work for me, then Karin was like, "Do you know anybody that's looking for work?" And I had just seen this guy on the sidewalk, a friend of mine that got laid off from KFA, and he hadn't found a job yet. So then we hired him, and then we hired another friend of mine, and we just kept growing, really up until 2020. We were constantly hiring, constantly getting new work, and able to say no to things. 2020 totally turned that around for us.
Which is interesting because, you mentioned kind of like how you guys decided to start that office after the 2008 crash, and how some of those big office buildings downtown were not used. I feel like the same thing happened with the pandemic, right? I mean, we do work in the Bay Area as well, and San Francisco's downtown is pretty much dead. Everybody's gone. So there is a ton of buildings that need that kind of work. So I would think that maybe by now, 2024, people are like reaching back out to you and be like, "Hey, we have those giant buildings that are empty. Like,
is there,
what can we do?"
Yeah, I guess the other thing I'm wondering with Marina is what Marina said is there an interest amongst clients, building owners, cities, developers for adaptive reuse projects?
There is a lot of interest, and we thought the same thing. We, in 2020, a lot of projects that we had stopped if they weren't funded already. If they were already funded, they kept going, but other people that didn't have funding couldn't get it, so those died. And we thought, okay, exactly the same thing you thought. Like, everybody's moved out. What a great opportunity to turn a lot of buildings around. We've done so many studies for people to show them how they could easily turn their office building to housing or into something else. And oftentimes it resulted in like, "Oh, thank you so much. I'm going to sit on this." And just wait for the market to turn. That's happened a lot. People have not been doing anything with those studies that we did, which was surprising to us.
Is it because they're not sure of the, I guess the economy of the country in general? Is it because they're not sure of the economic return? Like, is it actually going to pan out if they move forward with it because of a lack of experience or seeing precedents of other people with the same buildings doing the same thing? Like, you always need kind of like the first guy to do it for everybody to follow.
I think downtown specifically got hit really hard. I heard that like a third of the residents moved out during the pandemic, and I don't know that part has really recovered. So many restaurants and bars closed, and it's a difficult place to be. So I think people are not building new offices. All the reasons why, and then they're not building new housing there either, because people don't want to go there. Or at least that's what people think. I mean, honestly, even us, our office was downtown for 13 years, and we left downtown too. That was a little bit for different reasons. We were trying to buy a building for a long time so that we could do, what we do, but for ourselves. And we couldn't afford to buy anything downtown. So we bought a building in Chinatown. So adjacent. Also, like, for me, it really felt like it's so close to the brewery, to downtown. It's just, it felt like the right spot. And that we could talk about separately, but that, even for us being so focused and in love with downtown for so long, it was hard to make that decision to leave and to see things close down. And I don't think we're unique in that.
Yeah. The cost factor is a very real one for small businesses or businesses who don't have just a lot of cash to buy properties in downtown areas. But it's tough, right? It's a lot of the city centers in California and probably across the United States are suffering as a result of the pandemic, and it's this game of the people don't want to be there because the program is not there, the storefronts are shut down, and then the developers and owners don't want to do anything because no one's there. So it's like, but someone's got to make the first step here.
Exactly.
Or there's got to be some serious incentives. I don't know. I was also wondering, so when we talk about adaptive reuse, and let's say we're thinking specifically about the downtown LA region, what are those projects? Like, what kind of buildings are we looking at, and what are they being converted to? Are they offices to houses, houses to offices? I don't know, offices to retail? Like, what is the program?
It's a lot. Mostly offices to housing, some offices to hotels. That's more of what I do on the hotel side, just because we, had a lot of projects, so we had to kind of, split things off into people that have some more expertise. But mostly housing, I would say. But, all of those buildings are really mixed use. They're mostly 13-story buildings and ground floor retail. And then depends on the building. Everyone's a little bit different. There may be different uses in different parts of the building. Mostly housing. But, we're not only focused on downtown. We have been looking at properties and working all over the city, all over the region, I guess. Another thing that's happening, there's a new adaptive reuse ordinance that's going to be citywide. So the old ordinance was only for downtown and also Hollywood, but like very specific neighborhoods. There's a new ordinance that's about to come out that's supposed to be citywide. So you can do this type of work anywhere. But it's been about to come out for like a year and a half. So, we were part of helping to write that. We've done a lot of advocacy work, like helping the city with interpreting codes and creating ordinances. So then because of that, we know what's going on, what's in the ordinance. We've been meeting with people that have buildings all over the city, same type of discussions, and they are waiting for the ordinance to come out so they can do the work.
So I'm not familiar with the ordinance. Go ahead.
Oh no, I forgot what I was going to say actually.
My bad. I was going to ask the ordinance, which I'm not familiar with. So does that, what does it do? Does it encourage people to do things? Does it force people to operate a certain way if they have a building that's X years old, or?
No, it doesn't force you to do anything. It just allows you to convert office to housing by right. In zones where you wouldn't be able to do it.
Gotcha.
And I think it's for any existing building. It doesn't have to be a historic building. So it really opens up the possibilities.
Yeah.
So I'm very curious. Let's say I have a small commercial building somewhere in LA that's just, not being used anymore, and I'm thinking transforming it into housing. Do you guys also do like kind of like a feasibility study and even pro forma, let's say like I'm thinking they could be a good idea to turn into housing. I don't know if it's going to pan out, if it makes sense for the neighborhood, like financially, how much can I rent those units for, like all of that stuff? Or does the client usually come up already with a pretty good idea of what they want to do?
It's probably a mix. So a
Yeah.
lot of times the client has an idea what they want to do, or they, a general idea, we want to do housing. How could we make it work here? Um, Oftentimes people will come with an empty building and just be like, "Can you help us? We don't know what to do with this. Do you have
Yeah, yeah,
ideas?"
Yeah.
yeah,
So we'll do feasibility studies all the time. The
yeah.
financial performa, we don't really get that much involved in that.
Yeah.
But in terms of the architectural part and what you're allowed to do, yes, all the time. And I also forgot to mention that adaptive reuse ordinance 2.0 is City of LA. Santa Monica doesn't have an adaptive reuse ordinance, so we help them write their current ordinance, which is about to come out. But they are like much smaller cities, so they're doing it quickly. That will probably come out before LA's ordinance.
It's really cool. It's really interesting. I guess one specific, adaptive reuse architecture question is that when we talk about converting an office space into a hospitality hotel or housing, the first thing that comes to mind is the issue of plumbing, because offices generally their plumbing layout is completely different from what you need for a hotel and certain and for houses as well, and homes and units. So, how does that work? Because I've heard many times from people that it can't be done, or it's not financially viable specifically because of plumbing.
Have you heard of shared bathrooms?
I know, but
Yeah, I would say we don't really agree with that kind of thinking.
Yeah, I would assume that would be your answer. Yeah, yeah.
I mean, anything's possible. But yes, it does require new plumbing because the building doesn't operate the same way. I mean, a lot of those office buildings have a central core with elevators and central restrooms, and you need to separate that out. But you can still be efficient with it and have all your restrooms stacked. I mean, just like you would in a new construction building. So it's not really challenging to do that. I think more challenging is deeper floor plates. Where you have really big buildings. But we have lots of solutions for that too. So I think most buildings, it's possible to, turn into housing. Whether it's financially viable, that really is dependent block by block. Like how much did you have to buy that building for? And what kind of rents you're going to be able to get in that neighborhood? And those are a lot of other factors that go beyond just the plumbing issues.
Yeah, yeah.
So those
a
are
really
definitely
good point.
issues.
Yeah. We in a similar we don't do the type of work you do. We do houses mostly, but it's a lot of the same questions, not regarding the plumbing, but
well, remodel versus new construction. It's always
that's true for sure.
People want to tear down, and sometimes like, well, we could probably reuse some of it, or think about it differently. I think it's a cultural thing. I mean, like you said, and maybe that's like the American dream, just kind of like build it from scratch or like build your own thing versus inherited something from someone else and building on top of that. It's a different mindset, but
I could see that. Generally speaking, I could see that. So I guess taking a step back, here's a question I'm sure you have many answers to, is why is adaptive reuse valuable, important, and something that should be done?
Well, there's lots of reasons. One is the carbon footprint, putting a whole, especially if it's a high-rise building, putting a whole building into the landfill, like that's a terrible thing on its own. But then there's also, historic reasons and neighborhood cultural reasons to try to keep some of our existing fabric because it makes the place that we live richer. There's so many Type 5 buildings that are being built across the city that it's hard to tell the difference between a lot of them. And it makes... I think you kind of lose the uniqueness of different neighborhoods when there's so much of the same stock being built everywhere. And something else that's exciting to me is when you can take an old building that maybe everybody knows visually, but was not open to the public. Like I'm working on this Elks Lodge in MacArthur Park. That's this incredible 11-story, what's the style of the building? It's very like eclectic, strange, but interesting building that was a men's club, like men's only club. And then it became, just like a nightclub, an event center, filming only. And lots of things we're doing to that building, but making it possible to be open to the public so that everybody can go to that space. Similar thing, I'm working on this old craftsman house in Silver Lake that was used for 50, 60 years as a florist shop. And this Japanese family lived there and ran the florist shop. And so the neighborhood loves this. I just toured like the neighborhood council in the building this week, and they remember going there as kids and going to buy flowers, but they could only go to the front porch, and that was it. And now we're turning that into a hotel and restaurant bar with a pool open to the neighborhood. So like it's opening that up as a space that people remember, but they can also go and experience it forever now. So that's kind of a unique thing that is exciting to be doing.
I think it's interesting too that the fact that you and your family are local to LA, and I think it probably contributes to the way that you see those buildings and the fabric of the city kind of change. Like, like what you just mentioned about this family and their businesses and the importance of that in the neighborhood. I think only people who care about the places they live in or they've lived in would probably pay attention to that. And I'm not sure that's a lot of architects, to be honest, because also people move a lot and are interested in different things, and things just starts to be exported, imported, and mixed among places. But I think despite that, the importance of creating that local place is very important. And thinking about things that are beyond just designing a building, but what it means in designing a building in this particular site and place is super important.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think it's not only people that, have been here for a long time and are connected with that kind of history, but even in a place that you haven't been to, you feel that warmth when you go into an old place that's been renovated and turned into something new and cool. Like there's still a connection that you have with it that's different than going into a new construction building that's, beautiful, sleek concrete and is cold in some other ways. It doesn't mean that doesn't have a place too. This place is big enough for all of these things to happen.
It's I really like the description of that project and how actually when I think about it, a lot of your description didn't really have necessarily to do with the architecture itself, but more of what it means to the people. And I think that's also in kind of an urbanist perspective. And I also find that sometimes that's a bit lacking amongst architects, because this, like architects, we generally, right, we want to like make our thing, put our stamp kind of in the world and be like, this is what we've created and this is my way of doing it when we get to that side of the ego spectrum. And it's like very, very different if we talk about that individual compared to what you're doing. I don't know, it's very fascinating to me.
Yeah, and I think I do think about projects and buildings in that way. We don't do single family houses, and there's lots of reasons for that, but I guess for me it's less interesting or less exciting to do something that's just for like a couple of people.
Right.
Not that, but I think, of course I think that there's a place for that, and a lot of people do that, and that is great. But it's more exciting to me to be able to do something that a lot of people can enjoy.
Yeah.
That a lot of people can be a part of, right? Like we're working on Union Station right now and doing a bunch of reorganizing and rethinking of how that place operates. And that is cool because it's not just for, like if you do a hotel, a lot of people can go experience that too, but you also have to have money to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And Union Station is really for everybody. So I don't know, that's cool to be a part of.
Yeah, it really is. It's also funny because I don't know what it was like for you when you were in school, but the projects that I did in school and what we all did, all my classmates, we very rarely did like a proper single family house. You do houses, at least I did when you're like second year, first year, but they're more experimental architectural exercises than they are a normal house. Like one of the assignments was design a house for someone who's blind. Then you have to think about it's something to work with. But beyond those projects, all the projects are public facing things like museums and libraries and that kind of stuff. And I don't have a question necessarily, except for I do, since we do a lot of houses, I do miss those types of projects because there's just a different set of criteria and thinking that comes into play. Like you really have to think about all the stuff you mentioned, and then obviously, there's a bunch of other stuff regarding context and the city, and your kind of worldview is inherently, and it has to be much bigger than, oh, Susan doesn't like red, so we can't use red. Oh, they like pink, but only this shade of pink. This kind of like conversation, which of course I'm oversimplifying house design, but there is an aspect to the work you're describing that I personally do miss because it's a different set of issues.
Yeah, and your client is not just Susan, or it's not just the developer. No, but it's not just the developer that wants to turn this into, whatever we're going to change it into. It's all of the people that are going to use it, and the neighborhood, and how it's going to interact with what's going on across the street and in broader areas. It's a kind of a different problem to solve. It's interesting.
I was wondering if you've ever done any cool discovery in any of the buildings that you've worked on. Because I remember working on a project when I was, back in New York. That was an adaptive reuse. It used to be this pharmaceutical manufacturing building, and we were surveying to transform it into kind of an incubator for local food businesses, right? And I just remember opening doors and finding those giant equipment and imagining the life that was there before, or like a cool thing that you're trying to kind of like puzzle piece thing together and understand how the spaces were used, and maybe what's worth retaining for the new story to come and all of that stuff. So I was wondering, out of all of the cool buildings you guys have worked on in downtown LA, if there is like anything that's just kind of like kind of like made for a good memory.
Both good and bad.
Bad.
Almost every building we find something interesting like that. You never know what you're going to find when you take down a wall. Find weird little, I don't know, we find like wall paintings and things like that. I don't know, I've got like a handrail right here from a building.
Oh, wow.
Hey, you're stealing stuff from the site.
This is the last original handrail from a building that I did downtown, but we used it to match to. Honestly, when they started the project, all the handrails were there, and people kept breaking in and stealing it for the metal, for the brass. So that's why I took this piece to keep it.
You're one of the people who broke in and stole a piece of brass.
But we were able to match it and replace it. So I mean, that's not good. Such an exciting story. But there was a building I worked on Skid Row that it was one of the original single room occupancy hotels that was built for when the train station used to be on 7th Street. Anyway. It was a Skid Row housing building, and it was like deemed by the police department the most dangerous housing project in the city. So we did a structural renovation and like combined units to create like bigger, small apartments that have a kitchenette. Everyone has their own bathroom instead of a bathroom down the hall, kind of thing. And they wouldn't let me go into the building without an armed security guard. And in construction, we found like on the ground floor, the slab was cracked and like sinking a little bit. So we were trying to figure out like what's going on with this. And then we realized the slab was like only an inch thick right there. There was a body buried there.
Oh my.
Who knows how or when that happened, but somebody, did that and tried to patch it.
Wow.
So strange things. Yeah, fine.
I assume when that happens, like the whole site gets shut down because it
Oh, yeah.
becomes
Construction
Absolutely.
gets delayed,
a
the
crime
schedule
and-
gets messed up. I know.
I
It's
guess it's a
annoying.
crime
It
crime
is a crime
scene. I
scene.
mean, it
Yeah.
is,
Yeah.
right?
Absolutely. Shut the
Oh,
project
that's
down.
insane.
But
I mean, if you're gonna bury a body and pour concrete, do
need more than an inch, man.
What are you doing?
yeah, right. We wouldn't have
Don't be
disturbed
cheap.
it otherwise.
I know. But I'm kind of curious with these projects, and I know it must be project to project, so maybe you have some examples in mind. But what are some of the challenges with an adaptive reuse project? I mean, is it from the architect side? Is it dealing with the regulations of changing it over? Is it meeting code requirements? Bringing everything up to current code demands?
Yes, all of those things.
All of that.
All those things.
Yeah, a lot of projects we work on are historic, so that helps in some ways. We can use some parts of the historic building code. Honestly, the historic building code is not super helpful, but there are things that we can use from that. Like a lot of times the stairs, almost every time the stairs are not code compliant, right? But
Yeah.
we write a modification to allow that, and it allows us to not bring the windows up to Title 24. It allows us to use older versions of the mechanical code. There's a lot of challenges. A lot of times it's so expensive to do that we get historic tax credits with the National Park Service. So that gives you like 20% of your construction costs back in tax credits.
Wow.
So
Wow.
then that's a
not bad.
whole. No, it's great. Especially if, some of these projects are $60 million. So it's not little.
It's just, a big chunk.
But then there's lots of things you have to be taking into account, like making sure that, this historic door frame with this plaster molding we're keeping intact, or removing it and putting it back. Those things are all possible. But just
So do you
thinking
guys-
about it all the way through.
Do you guys have someone in your team in-house in the office that's kind of like a restoration expert for some of those types of repairs, or is it mostly
okay.
you are? You're like the Mary Poppins of architects. That's really cool. So how does that work? I mean, it sounds like you got formal training into like historical preservation, so you just kind of like do research and understand how to repair and restore those types of detailing and things.
Yes, and learning on the job. Because one of my first projects was a historic adaptive reuse conversion from office to housing. So I learned so much on that project. And often we'll have a historic consultant, but that person's doing more of like the writing of the documents to make it be a landmark, to get those tax credits. So
Gotcha.
I'm working with that person to write the language, but he or she is putting that part together, and then advising us on like, this is the right product to use to remove the paint off of the side of the building that is not going to damage the historic plaster or brick or things like that. So, with every project you learn something new, and then I think I'm at 15 projects that I'm working on right now. But it's,
Whoa.
I have a team for all those projects. So then I'm trying to train all of my people, what's the right thing to do. And, so I'm just like this destination for questions. So whether I know the right answer or, I don't always remember every single thing, but I'll remember like, oh, we dealt with that at the proper hotel. Talk to Jonathan. I know he's got the answer. He'll remember that part of it. So connecting all these people together. And then we've worked with a lot of restoration contractors too. And have had good and bad experiences with different ones. So that we're also doing advising the general contractor, like, we'd recommend these couple people. We didn't have a great experience with those people, that kind of thing. So just trying to like guide everybody all the time.
So how large is your office? I mean, to say, how many employees do you have?
I think we're 18 right now.
Okay, yeah, you guys are a good size.
Yeah, we were about 39 in 2020.
Wow.
So we had a lot of changes in the past few years.
Yeah.
Do you obviously when you're forced to downsize, it's not a great thing. But that aside, I'm wondering, do you personally prefer being in a studio of 18 to 24, like that kind of body, versus one that's closer to 40? Because there's super different work environments.
It is very different. I don't know that I know the answer. When we were 39, we were busting at the seams in our office. We were all on top of each other, and it was hard. It was hard to have a personal connection with everybody.
Yeah.
So when we were more in the 20s range, and we were like really great team, and we did lots of things together. We were around each other. I planned all sorts of events, outings, and things like that to keep that kind of energy going. So those were good numbers. I think when you get bigger, it's harder to maintain that. And now, different challenge. It's harder to maintain that when not everyone's working in the office all the time.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, right. I forgot. I forgot about that. Yeah. So are you guys on a hybrid? What do you call it? Work structure?
Yeah. We did that. Obviously, we did that in COVID. We went to 100% at home. For me, that was hard because I went from like being crowded by too many people to being 100% alone. So I think, I prefer the hybrid version. I've been in, a couple different architects roundtables where people were talking about this, and heard a lot of people saying that they really couldn't work with the hybrid method. They needed people to be in person so they could make sure that they were working, so they could look over their shoulder to make sure that they were actually doing work.
Yeah.
And that always felt strange to me too. Like, like it's a little too controlling. I know when people are not doing work, like it's not getting produced.
You can tell. Yeah.
But I also don't care if you want to take a 2-hour break or go run errands or whatever you want to do. That is fine too, as long as the stuff's getting done.
Yeah.
And so, when things are not getting done, then you have conversations with that person, or you figure out maybe that's not the right fit. You would have to do that anyway, but without the policing, like looking over your shoulder. I think we realized we didn't need to be there 100%, but what we needed was places to meet, to collaborate with each other. So in our new office, it's actually the same square footage as our old office, but we have twice the meeting space.
Cool.
So that we could go there and gather. And then, I'm going on a tangent, but we also started a co-working company in our space that is specifically for people in our industry. So architects, branding companies, we have a developer there, an appliance rep. That's a little bit of a mix, but we wanted to have a place where people that have a small office or that want to be hybrid or, things like that, have a professional place to meet, to have meetings with each other, with clients, have a materials library that is managed by somebody else. And we plan events and things like that are for the industry. So to create that kind of destination that maybe you can't do just from working from home or from, a small office can't necessarily afford to do all those things.
Yeah.
That's awesome. I like that. And that last part in particular, I'm not familiar. Maybe there are other places like that, in California or beyond that are specifically for our industries. But that's a great idea because it's definitely one of the professions where sharing knowledge and being around colleagues is super beneficial. I mean, we all know this. We went to school and had studios, right? Studio is like the essence of school.
Absolutely.
And it's, even when you're in a large well, I guess that's the benefit if you're working in a very, very large office, is there's that kind of feeling. But you're right, when it's a small practice, it's sometimes you feel like you're in your own little egg.
Yeah.
You don't really get out of that, and it's hard, right? Because there's not space. There's no physical space to go and be around people. I really like that idea.
I mean, and you get to talk about what you're doing, and you always learn from people, and your ideas get better when you kind of bounce them off other people. We also are able to talk about like how to collaborate with each other on potential other projects that we don't have experience on paper with public projects, but there's another office that's using our space that does have that, but they don't have experience in existing buildings. So then we can collaborate together on RFPs to go after projects together as a team.
Yeah, that's great. That makes total sense.
So things like that as an example.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's hard to make that happen on Zoom,
Zoom has its limitations for sure. Yeah, for sure it does. It's interesting. The policing aspect of having people in an office is a funny one. I mean, on one hand, I understand it, but at the same time,
totally.
I think to your point, if you're having those problems, then you're going to have those problems anyway, or it probably highlights that maybe this isn't the right person to start with. Like if they can't handle their own stuff. I mean, there's extremes, right? If if they live by themselves and they're in a tiny studio apartment, then there's other issues, that come with that kind of environment and setup. But yeah, I think actually in a way the working remotely or in a hybrid schedule probably just revealed people's innate or how they would work, and how much responsibility you can give them truly on their own. That's kind of the ultimate test.
I think it's not perfect. It's not a perfect solution, of course.
Yeah.
That's one of the things we're missing is, that camaraderie. Which we had I think we had a great culture before that we're struggling to, bring back. It's not gone totally, but it is hard to get people to come in. And we haven't wanted to put a rule. Like a lot of hybrid companies are like, you have to be here 3 days a week or whatever the rule is. We haven't done that, but also partially because we haven't been able to pay people 100% of their salary for a lot of this year. So, it's hard to make a rule like that in that situation.
Yeah, for sure. Kind of an odd question, I suppose. Do you find that the people who work at your office are they very much aligned with the mission of the office? Like, because you guys do such specific work, and clearly, the founder and yourself and the people that are higher up, let's say, are very, very passionate. It's a very focused thing that you're doing compared to, for a lot of architects, they're working at a place and the office does commercial work, but it's maybe kind of generic. It's good, it's fine, but it's not like they have an attachment, this kind of deep mission statement behind their existence as an architect at this office. For you guys, though, is it different? Is everyone at the office going in the same direction?
I think it's not black and white. I think Karn and I probably are the most aligned and the most passionate about this type of work. I think there's a varying spectrum of how passionate people are to, maybe the other side of why people work there is because it's a super interesting challenge to work on this kind of puzzle piece that we work on. And I think, there's varying degrees of everyone in between that are super interested in the history or in the green possibilities or positives about that. There are few people in our office that really want to do new construction, and we do that sometimes. Often it's if there's an existing building on a larger site, so then we can rehabilitate that building and then develop the rest of the site. So we always are checking in with everybody. We've got like a lot of matrices about lots of things, but one of them is about people's interests and skills and knowledge. So then every time something new comes in, if there's a project that has a new construction component, we're like, oh, then let's make sure we put those two people on it because that's their passion. So we try to align things as we can where possible.
Yeah, I love it. That makes a lot of sense. I was also wondering, and we might have covered this already sort of, but when it comes to talking with clients about these types of projects, is it hard to convince someone who doesn't know anything about adaptive reuse that it's a worthwhile direction and path? Like, how does that conversation go? And this stems from a larger interest in just how architects speak with clients in general, because I do find that it's not easy for any type of project that we're talking about. But I was curious about
Right.
adaptive reuse. What that conversation is like.
I think we don't have that many people coming to us that are wanting to tear their building down, and we're trying to convince them not to do it.
Mm-hmm.
That
Marina's laughing at my question. I'm like, obviously, I'm like, yes, that's true. That's true.
That's
Probably not a good
surprise.
fit then, right? But
We've done the research,
I mean, we have some, a good amount of repeat clients, a lot of referrals, a lot of people coming to us because we have built some kind of name for ourselves in doing this kind of work. So not that many times are we having to have that conversation. Mm-hmm. Not all the time, though. Like, for example, a few years ago, we worked with the city of Santa Monica on the Santa Monica airport. And they specifically asked us to do a study of all their existing buildings at the airport because they're planning to turn the airport into a park. So they wanted to see, like, what buildings should we keep? What should we remove?
Mm-hmm.
And of course, our stance was, well, keep almost everything. They didn't agree with all of that, but there are some cool and really weird aircraft hangars. Like, there's one that's shaped like a 4-leaf clover that fits 4 planes, like it in this weird way. And so we were proposing, like, that could become a cool cafe. That could become, this kind of creative office space. That was one of the harder, like, clients, I guess, to try to convince why they should keep it and not tear it down.
Yeah.
But mostly
do you ever,
that people are coming to us because they have something existing and they're trying to figure out what to do.
Do you ever have the opposite where, you've looked at the building and really it doesn't make sense to keep it? Like, there's not much to salvage?
Sometimes, and honestly, those kinds of buildings are also cool. Like, we love to take a shitty building and turn it into something cool. Especially if it's not designated historic, that gives you so much more possibility to do cool things. I often joke, like, I want to be the demo czar of the city of LA. To be like, you can't demo that, you can't demo that, you need to demo that, you need to demo that.
Yeah. I'm good. I would vote for you. I'm good with that. There needs to be a demo czar or maybe a committee of some sort.
We actually have stickers here that says good architecture, bad architecture. So that could be, we could do a demo, non-demo one, and you can just go around LA and do that.
That's not a bad idea.
It's not a bad idea.
Your earlier comment about the Type 5 construction, a lot of it looking kind of similar. I don't know. Were you envisioning the single-family houses, multifamily structures? Like, what were you envisioning when you said that?
Oh, when I said that, I was talking about multifamily, like, the 5 to 7 stories over a concrete podium. And I did some of that work too at KFA. That was one of the other reasons that I wanted to join Karin, because I definitely learned on those projects, but I got bored.
Yeah.
It's brutal. I think now I'm very clearly imagining what you're describing. We're probably envisioning some of the same exact buildings, in fact, but there's a lot of those scattered throughout Southern California and even Northern California, sort of, but a lot of in Southern California. And I was joking with a friend a while ago that there's, kind of like 4 versions of that building. There's the box version where you put a big box around like 3 stories and you create boxes. You have like the ribbon version. Then you have, there's another like 2 that I'm forgetting. And that's kind of it. And Some of them are good for sure.
Sure.
You know, they're not groundbreaking, but for what they're doing, they make sense. But a lot of them are just super mediocre.
Yeah.
And it's brutal because we need housing and they're popping up. So that's good. But it's also like, what are we doing to the city? You know, just this generic repetition.
I think also a lot of clients sometimes feel like it's more expensive to keep a building and do an adaptive reuse or a remodel than just tearing down and starting new.
Huh.
And I guess if there is some repair work, maybe there is some cost associated to that. But you're still saving. Like the way I'm thinking about it is that you're still saving on foundation time, like building, the bones of the structure.
Absolutely.
So have you found that is it true that they're usually more expensive or not so much because you're saving quite a bit and keeping what's there?
And what about time, schedule?
And schedule, yeah.
Yeah, those are great questions. It really depends on the building. There are a lot of things in, high-rise historic buildings that you couldn't recreate today.
Yeah.
So that is a great cost savings from that. The schedule, honestly, often it's same timeline to do something new. It's a hard question to answer because, a lot of those type 5 7-story apartment buildings that we're talking about are taking over much lower density properties, right? So they're able to get way more units out of the site.
Right.
So you're able to get more out of it. In a high-rise building that probably is already taller than the zone allows, so you have an existing non-conforming FAR, you're able to get more by keeping it.
Yeah.
So, it's a calculation that is really dependent on each site.
Yeah, that's really cool. I like that the investigative aspect of what you do, the feasibility studies, but just in general for the projects, like understanding what you're working with and then moving from there. The final question that we always ask for fun is, what is your favorite building? And maybe I'll also ask for 2 buildings, one more historic and then one that's new. And they don't have to be your own projects, just buildings in general.
I really love the Hollywood Bowl.
That's a good one. I've not had that one before.
I love that place. And maybe part of that is because when I was a kid, that's where we would go buy our Christmas tree, at the Hollywood Bowl parking lot. And then then we could run around, the seating area, and you could watch the orchestra rehearse during the day, and it's a place that if you have a lot of money, you can get one of those boxes in the front and be right up close. If you don't, you can get a $12 seat in the back, and both experiences are amazing. The whole city comes together. Depending on what type of concert you're going to, the audience is different. Like if you go to classical, it's a bunch of old white people shushing you for talking, but it's it's like this calm Zen experience. If you go to like a jazz and blues night, like everybody is sharing their food across the aisle to everyone else, and it's just like a great party. I don't know, that place is magical.
Like it. That's a great one.
And the building is so cool too. I made a Halloween costume out of the Hollywood Bowl once. That's how much I like the building.
Was the bowl the hat, or was it a full body and okay, it's a hat.
Yeah, it's like
oh my.
I can show you a picture. It's right there actually.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
And then a new construction building, that's a harder question. I love Peter Zumthor, and like the baths and Valls, that is an incredible place. I also am so upset about LACMA because I loved those old buildings. I love the new idea. I love the idea of going across the street and like having that amorphous thing that you can drive under and be above. And I just hate that we had to tear the old building down to do that. So I don't know, I'm conflicted with that, but
yeah. Nice. Love it. Morgan, this was great. Thanks so much for making the time and seeing how you are the person that everyone comes to for questions. That is why we're doing this recording on a Saturday morning, which is hardcore dedication from you. So it's much appreciated. And thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you for having me. This was great.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for watching this video on YouTube. If you like what we're doing, then please support our show by hitting that subscribe button.
You can also find us on most of the social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We're mostly on Instagram. And you can reach out to the hotline, 213-222-6950. You can send a text message or leave a voicemail. If you have any reaction to this recording, any questions you might have, or guest suggestion, feel free to send it our way.
Cool. Thank you for watching and see you next week.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye.